Thank you for the opportunity to introduce you to this wonderful project, Parliament Square. I'm going to be talking about the heritage aspects of it. In particular, I know that David Hazler will be talking later about the project more generally. The project involved a number of very significant buildings, including Parliament House. The new building at the back of that, the new office block at the back of it, we actually documented and designed the interface elements in Parliament House itself. But elsewhere, the remaining heritage buildings were actually retained as part of the hotel. So St Mary's building, the government printer's office, which was a red brick building in the middle of the site, which was not heritage listed. The main part that you see on Davey Street, which is heritage listed, Salamanca Extension, the Hydroelectric Commission building, and the Art Deco building. The photo on the left here shows very much part of the problem was that the red brick building, which is not listed, was in the middle of the site, kept light and air out of the more significant buildings on the perimeter. So that was demolished down to one level above the present courtyard level, and that allowed that whole space to be opened up. And with the combination of new additions to the rear of those significant buildings, services and things could be recreated and activate the whole of the precinct. There are a lot of stone repairs to be done, including replacement of parapets, etc. But there are some very serious structural issues with some of the stone walls. Because it's such a complex site, forgive me for racing through this because there's a lot to cover. But one of the principles which underpinned the whole of the heritage approach on this site was that the existing buildings drove the agenda. And so we retained the configuration and whatever remained of the old buildings, including sort of artifacts that might have been found in situ, joinery where it survived, etc. There was not a lot in the way of decoration, but the program that was required by the hotel and the restaurants and the bars, etc., all fitted within the spaces. The spaces were not altered to fit the program. That was the fundamental principle. And in the hotel rooms themselves, there was the issue of trying to achieve acoustic and fire separation between the units. And we had all these wonderful timber doors from various periods. None were prioritised over the others, but we wanted to retain as many as possible. So we introduced a little lobby where necessary to be able to put that line of defence back further into the room and retain in the corridors the original joinery. In other areas, the service areas were put in the new additions so that the rooms could be retained with very little alteration. Very quickly, the elevations as it's completed, and then these are photographs on completion with the new FJMT office building behind Parliament House on the left and the hotel on the right. The entry to the hotel through the Murray Street building, the former hydroelectric building, and then the addition on top of the Art Deco building, which follows the geometry of the original building. Davey Street, very important elevation with three major entries. There, two of the entries were still used or not, but not occupied, and one had been blocked up into a window. They were all retained and missing joinery put back, and it enables in the future, should another use or the same use want to reactivate those entries, it can happen. They're not activated at the moment. So very significant part of Hobart streetscape. The entry into the courtyard of Salamanca Place between the new and the old. Well, that was a quick 4 minutes. And then the courtyard is surrounded on two sides by very clearly old buildings, with the new work integrated into the old. It was not sort of done as a separate exercise. We worked together on this to solve the problem. The Pina restaurant in the remains of the red brick building, the courtyard, the restaurant inside, the walls of that restaurant are defined on two sides by external walls of the retained buildings, and quirky bits in each of the space, as I said, were retained. In Mary, the whiskey bar, the steel shutters which covered the windows to make it a secure vault for records have been retained in situ and a part of the character of the space. Elsewhere, lounge areas, similar approach. spaces which had been used just for services were opened up and repaired and made as public passages where possible. Private dining room in a space which housed compactus and records. And here, one important thing about this whole of the ground floor was that it had actually been floored over in concrete, and the concrete floor was removed and a steel frame timber floor inserted to allow subfloor ventilation, plus retention and protection of archaeology that was found beneath the concrete. Lots of things discovered during the process. And a vault that is now a private wine selection room. This is a gym where it had just been opened up to the air and light, and surveyors measuring devices for checking the accuracy of measuring chains, retained in situ, a new stair accessed via an arch which was found above a bulkhead, and this is the entry that was reinstated off Davey Street to the Government Printer's Office. The joinery was reconstructed. It was probably the most substantial bit of reconstruction that was done based on site evidence, documents and photographs. And the hotel rooms, wherever possible, have retained sort of the quirky bits and original fabric where that was able to be exposed. This shows an external wall of one of the buildings within the bedroom. And another vault here turned into a bathroom with an added floor to take the services, and the original features, except for the shelving, are retained exposed. This is the most spectacular suite, one of the most spectacular suites in the whole hotel. It's got a 10-form ceiling, and you can see on the right there, the fireplaces were reactivated as well, but you can see on the right there, this stone wall, which almost collapsed into Davey Street before we stabilised and repaired it, and you could see daylight between the stones. It's terrible. The Art Deco room is simpler, but again, the original external joinery retained, and a second line of joinery placed inside that aluminium frame to achieve acoustic and thermal compliance. And there was an interior in the hydroelectric commission building, which was lined in French polished blackwood. And the building behind had to be taken down and the facade retained, and the new building that was put up contained a space where this joinery could be reassembled in its original location, in its original configuration. And these are not bedroom suites. These are rooms that the hotel guests can use. So I'm hoping you might be able to see these spaces when you go around, assuming you choose to go around to visit it. This is just the relationship between the new and the old, the signage, very carefully designed, beautifully executed. The whole lot was a wonderful collaboration between us all. And these are some of the quirky bits which are within rooms that the guests get to discover when they go there. It really adds a whole lot of layering of the stories in this place, which you don't normally get retained. Normally these things are sort of whited out, removed, etc., and you lose the identity of it, which is contrary to what we were trying to do. I'm sorry, but that's all I could say.
Clearly a complicated and dense project.
Yes.
One of the questions, and I don't know whether you can talk to this or not, the conservation effort aside, which is enormous, in terms of the contemporary interventions that are made onto that site, how is that dialogue working? What are the kind of main drivers of that language?
It was to make it honestly modern, and we had worked before with FJMT on TMAG. So we already knew, where each of us were coming from. And there were lots of arm wrestles, yes, but FJMT respected the idea that we needed to retain the character and quality of the spaces, and where possible, respect those stories, not rewrite the history book. So it was honestly modern, not trying to reproduce anything, nothing's fake. That was the approach. So we worked together on that, and they would come back to us with some ideas about how to do things like the stair extension. And we'd already identified that that's where a stair had been, and that new stair could be a completely modern one. The stair would have been replaced a couple of times, but the same location. It was this conversation. We had lots of meetings. We would come down here together and do our site visits, and that was really important. And we also had wonderful builders who would contact us if they found something. We were coming down regularly.
I don't know if we're going to have time, but I think there's a client in here that obviously needed support.
Yes.
And I'm not sure about the comment, but as you're uncovering, I guess, and you know, costs would come into it. You know, I guess we'll have to leave it there.
Yeah. The client was just as excited as we were and very supportive.